So I teach Old Testament and hermeneutics, mainly Old Testament, so I'm going to focus on that. And how does it benefit people? In many ways, I hope so, at least. I guess this question can be answered on two different levels. One level could be called the practical level. The Old Testament is simply rich, extremely rich, and it touches on many different questions, starting from sexual life. If you want to learn about what sex is and why it is great, read the Song of Songs. Through social issues, if you read the book of Amos, it speaks about right worship of God and social justice, and how these two things, seemingly two different things, are interlinked, and one is impossible without the other. And a host of other issues like giving tithes, giving your money. Malachi chapter 3 speaks about that question. When you have very little, how it is important even in those times to give what you have to God and to take the risk, although it might seem impossible. Or how to pray. Jesus taught the disciples how to pray, but that's only a few lines. In the Old Testament, we have 150 Psalms from which we can learn how to pray in different situations, not to mention all the great prayers of Daniel and Nehemiah and Solomon in other parts of it. So it's simply rich, and it teaches us a lot of practical skills. But there is a different level which might be even more important. At least I find it more important, and I'm afraid some of my students might call it a bit more theoretical level, although I'm tempted to call it the even more practical level of life. And it is simply that it helps us to find our place in life, in the world, and also it helps us to find a place for God. It teaches us about the mystery of God. It teaches that we cannot really fathom him out completely. He is just bigger, greater than we are. When God seems to be far away, is he really far away? How can we find God's presence when he seems to be absent? A great passage for this is 1 Kings 19, when Elijah meets God, and he meets God in the silence. We have God in the silence there. Or other theoretical questions, like the question of election. Are people, nations elected because they are better? Well, that's one possible answer, but it's also at the same time a somewhat troubling answer. But then the other option is that they are elected just because they are elected. It's the sovereign grace of God. But then, doesn't this mean that election is unfair? That you might be a better person, yet not elected? And these are difficult questions, and very often we are not able to answer these questions, but the Old Testament raises these questions for us. So it teaches us about the mystery of God. It raises really hard questions, and thereby it forces us to face the mystery of life, the greatness of God, and the greatness and smallness of human beings. And these are issues which we might want to neglect in the busyness of life. But if we don't reflect on these questions, then the busyness of our life becomes empty. Then it loses its basis. So I think it's really important that the Old Testament forces us to ask these questions.